As a small nonprofit, we recently contracted the services of the husband of a staff member who is an accountant to help clean up our QuickBooks and provide training to our ED to give her the tools and confidence necessary for the small amount of bookkeeping that is required as part of her job. He gave us a great price and is in effect volunteering much of his time. Well, he approached me as board chair recently saying that he would be happy to sit on the board of directors and lend some financial expertise to the board. He mentioned that he would be able to continue to provide some contracted hours in the future, providing bookkeeping-related services. I know that employees cannot sit on the board, but what about contracted services? I'm leaning towards telling him it's an either-or situation, but I would love to hear your thoughts.
So the first question I have, of course, is, do you have a conflict of interest policy in place? I mean, one of the things I always think about related to this kind of stuff is, what does your policy say? But my instinct is just, in general, I think it's cleaner and neater to say it's an either or. I think in particular, I mean, yes, you can absolutely have someone providing contracted services serve on your board, follow your conflict of interest policy procedure. I'm not a fan of it, particularly when it relates to anything financial, because of the board's financial and fiduciary duties, even if it's bookkeeping, which we know isn't high level in any form. It just feels like there is some confusion and messiness with that I wouldn't be comfortable with. So even in that case, I would say maybe it's kind of you either serve on the board and don't get paid and someone else does, or you don't. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, just to throw an and in there, it says that they're providing training that's like all pretty much just he's volunteering to do it. So why doesn't he just completely volunteer to do it? Like
True.
There's no reason that, I mean, because you could avoid all the conflict of interest stuff and just say, sure, you could be on the board, but you mind not charging us for the help you're giving us? I mean, as a board member, maybe that could be part of your contribution, is to provide that kind of assistance to us too. I don't think that would be, I think most people would be, oh, okay, that sounds like a good idea. I agree. I was going to offer that anyway, right? Instead of like, well, I really want to be on your board and tell you how to do things a different way and have you pay me.
Yeah.
Like, that doesn't seem like, man, I don't want that guy on my board anyway.
And I guess I would also want to encourage the organization to think through whether they actually really need and want these services or someone with this kind of expertise on their board. I think I see a lot of times organizations that end up, someone suggests maybe a board seat and they gravitate, right? Like they grab onto them because they're desperate for board members. And I also think this is a chance to step back and say, okay, what skill sets and expertise are we looking for on our board? And all the other litany of questions. What kind of diversity are we looking for? Racial and ethnic diversity, age diversity. What are we looking at for connections and ability to fundraise? So just because someone asks you or says, hey, I could provide your board some of these services with a board seat, doesn't automatically mean you should jump at having them on your board either. So I would also really encourage thinking through that in a bit of a more holistic way, instead of just kind of jumping at this opportunity. Perhaps it is a great fit and that's okay, but at least be thoughtful about it and not reactive to it.
Nonprofit governance.
Nonprofit answers.
Nonprofit board.
Nonprofit management.
Nonprofit marketing.
Nonprofit resources.
The Alliance for Nevada Nonprofits presents Nonprofit Everything, the podcast about everything nonprofit, with your host, Andy Shurick and Stacy Wedding.
Hey, it's podcast day. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Nonprofit Everything. Today, Stacy Wedding and I'm Andy Shurick. We're here to answer your nonprofit questions. So find us on Facebook, find us on Twitter, go to the Nonprofit Everything webpage, bother Stacy at home at night, whatever you need to do to get your questions to us. We've still got stickers available, so we'll send you a sticker if you include your address, and we will answer those questions. The podcast, the Nonprofit Everything podcast, is a production of the Alliance for Nevada Nonprofits. So if you haven't, go check out the Alliance for Nevada Nonprofits. They've got a bunch of cool programming coming up this year, and there's really neat stuff going on. So if you're not a member, it's a one of the really great ways you can support the podcast. Today's episode is sponsored by the HR Collaborative. The HR Collaborative was formed to help build nonprofit strengths through improved human resources. It provides professional development opportunities, networking, and sharing of best practices on HR issues faced by nonprofit organizations. The collaborative meets bi-monthly. Membership is free and open to anyone who works for a nonprofit and has HR responsibilities. For more information or to attend an upcoming meeting, visit their website at www.hrcollaborativellv.org. Check out the Nonprofit Everything show notes for more information. Okay, Stacy, I'm the ED of a small but not tiny organization. I feel like I'm spread so thin. How do I multitask without just doing a poor job on everything?
Oh, my heart goes out. This is so tough, right? I don't know about you, Andy, but I think one of the most challenging jobs out there is being an ED of a small nonprofit. It's like you're wearing so many hats. Mm-hmm. So first of all, I want to just kind of reach through the microphone and give you a big hug. But since I can't do that, just consider this your online hug just to say, hey, we feel you. We know it's tough. But here's my thing. I'm going to give some tough love here. I don't think multitasking is the solution at all. There are countless studies that and one of them that recently, I pulled this up because I remember reading it. The American Psychological Association did a study that said you actually, when you multitask, no matter how seamless it seems, so even if you're just, whatever you're doing, like you're on the computer typing an email, but then you hear your phone ring, buzz from a, ding for a text alert, and you go and look over, that distraction is enough that it slows down your brain, no matter how seamless it feels to you, to the point that it actually slows things down like 40%. You go 40% faster when you just focus, when you don't multitask. Now, I don't think this applies to I think all of us can relate to if I'm washing the dishes at home or something at night and having a conversation with somebody on the phone. I can probably do both of those things. But I think anything that requires some degree of thinking and accessing different parts of our brain, multitasking actually slows down the process. So what I would encourage this ED to do is don't multitask. I actually say do just the opposite. Focus, right? Focus, block time and focus time. And if you can discipline yourself, and guess what? I haven't been able to do this with myself, so I'm not sure if you can do this. But if you can discipline yourself, maybe it's checking your emails 3 times a day or looking at those things that distract you and setting up a pattern or a time where you turn off all those notifications during the time you need to do focused work. A lot of people swear by that. I think it's really challenging, and it's just my own lack of self-discipline, but that's another thing to think about.
I remember when offices had doors? Actually, remember when we had offices?
Yeah, I was like, that's been a while, right?
And that was always like the signal that you had something that you needed to do. That's your brain telling you that you're not very good at doing a lot of things at once, that any kind of distraction, whether it's something that you've created for yourself, your sort of Pavlovian response to the chime on your phone that says that there was another tweet you were mentioned in or something right? Anything that just instantly makes you go away from what you're doing. Yeah, you're right. It takes time away. I think for this one though, I think multitasking I think we both totally agree on multitasking. Right? That multitasking slows you down and it's not good. Yeah. So you need to figure out how to get focus time in. I don't think anybody would disagree with that.
Yeah.
I think the challenge for the ED of a small but not tiny organization isn't multitasking. It's being responsible for everything and knowing that everything is on your shoulders, and that because it's small and you don't have the support staff to do all of the 100 things that you need to do, that you're doing the accounting, you're doing the fundraising, you're doing the operations stuff, you're doing HR, you're dealing with board members. I mean, it's just the pile of work that you're responsible for. And that's not multitasking.
No.
That's just being overloaded with responsibility.
Absolutely.
So one of the things that, and God forbid, we're just going to jump right back to a sports analogy. One of the things that baseball teams discovered a long time ago was that people perform better when they're able to specialize. So like a long time ago, we had Babe Ruth. Did you know Babe Ruth, who Babe Ruth is, right?
Oh yeah, I do know that, but don't get much more complicated.
Do you know what position he played? What is he famous for? Do you remember what he's famous for?
I don't know.
He was super good at hitting home runs.
Okay.
He hit like a zillion home runs.
Okay.
Do you know what position he played?
No.
He was a pitcher.
Really?
Really? So you know enough about baseball to know that it's absurd for a pitcher to be really,
insane.
really good
Totally
at home runs,
different.
right?
Yeah.
And it's because what we've discovered, sports is a good way of especially baseball, iterating on problems over and over again to come up with the most minute changes to be able to make better outcomes.
Right.
So, which is why we use it as an analogy all the time. But the fact that we've discovered that there's something about the skills that you need as a pitcher that don't necessarily correlate to the skills that you need as a batter. And so it's rare for pitchers to even hit home runs. Like the American League just got away with you know what? Pitchers shouldn't even have to hit.
Yeah.
They can sit down. We'll get another guy that's better at hitting.
Yeah.
We'll let him do it. And so understanding that kind of paradigm, you can put that in place for a nonprofit as well. You're good at something. The reason you're an ED is because you're really good at something. You didn't get that job because you suck at everything. You got that job because you're good at something.
Yep.
And so trying to figure out a way that you can carve out the things that you're good at and then figure out ways to get other people to do the things that you're not so good at.
Yes.
Right. And so I think that's the solution, is not to worry about, am I being distracted and doing any more focus time, but to think about, what do I do really, really well?
Yeah.
And can I continue to do that while passing off the stuff that I don't do as well onto other people?
Absolutely.
I worked for a manager years ago, and she was world-class fundraiser. She could literally get blood from a stone. It was totally possible for her to do that.
Sell ice to an Eskimo.
Yeah. It was amazing. And one of the things that she understood really, really well, and one of the things that made her so good at her job, she didn't care about anything else. The rest of the operation, she was leaving up to people that she trusted to do that.
Absolutely.
And she focused all of her time on the things that she was good at, and she did a really, really good job. So I think, again, answering the wrong question.
Well, but I think there's an underlying piece to this that you bring up that's a really good piece, because that probably is much more likely the issue at hand. And I guess that also goes back to me saying you need to know where you're going to also know where to focus, because, I'm a bit of a nut around this, but I'm like, if you don't have a plan, or if you don't know where you're trying to get by the end of the year, it's also it's easy to just respond and react to everything and say yes to a bunch of things that probably aren't going to get you there. So even if this is like a one-page handwritten, plan with a few big picture goals. I'm not saying you have to go through a whole strategic planning process. I mean, that's ideal, but if you can't, there's something to give you that focus, that direction, and then you're right, build on the strengths. And I think people love it. I've heard of nonprofits who have found volunteers or even a board member that maybe wants to play a more active role, understands there's a governing role and a support role, but is willing to step in to help out on some of those things that maybe are their strengths. There's a lot of ways to, skin that cat, but I think that figuring that out is really invaluable. You're right, your strengths and interests, because otherwise you're also going to burn out. I mean, all of us hate doing something that we're like, okay, I sort of suck at this, or I don't really understand it, or it just doesn't really light my fire. I mean, we know you can't do that every day as an executive director or any staffer, but I think as an ED saying, yeah, this is where I kind of stand apart from the rest, I think that makes perfect sense. So.
And it's interesting. One of the things that you get away with as the ED too is you get to decide what your job is.
Yeah, isn't that cool?
Your board kind of has some responsibility. Your board will tell you need to do X, Y, and Z, but really they're empowering you with operating the entire organization. So if you hate HR, if it just you walk in and you've had to do something HR related and it just makes you angry,
right? That
tells you, let's find somebody who can do this for you so that you don't have to mess with it anymore.
Right.
And just realize that everybody under you doesn't have that choice.
Totally.
The ED is the only person in the entire organization that gets to decide, man, I don't feel like doing that. I'm going to assign somebody else that job.
And the one thing we don't know about the situation, we don't know, I don't think the person said that they are, they said they work for a small but not tiny. So that also makes me think there's potentially maybe some other paid staff in the mix, or even a couple of paid staff in the mix. So I would also ask this person to think through, are they delegating to the best of their ability? And I know delegation can be so tough, especially if you started where maybe you started as a one-person, band, and now you're a 3-person band. That is one of the biggest growing points as an ED.
God forbid you're the founder. Would throw that one into the mix.
Dear Lord, that just complicates it further. Right. And then, this person, the person who wrote this question in is probably going to laugh at the suggestion because they're like, I already don't have enough time. So Stacey, there's no way I'm going to do what you're about to suggest. But I want to share that here's where I can commiserate a little. I always struggle. I struggle with delegation. I struggle with some of the boundaries and not taking it all on and focusing on my strengths and delegating this stuff, the other stuff to other folks. That's always been a lifelong challenge. It's something I'm getting better at because I've been intentional at working at it. But recently, someone challenged me to do a time study. Now, Andy, if you have never done a time study before, let me tell you how painful this process is. I basically got through 2 days when I was challenged to do it for a week, but I got enough intel on my 2 days doing it. So the goal is that you, every 15 minutes, are keeping track of what you're doing. So in the 15 minutes that perhaps I checked my social media, checked my text message, wrote an email, I have to write that down. And I'm going to tell you what, I started to drive myself nuts as I was going through that process because I realized how much I am constantly distracted. Oh, I heard a ding, again, that Pavlovian response, the dopamine hit that our brain gets with that. So, but it was eye-opening to me. And so for me, I am working to, I'll report back at a later date, but I am working to really start to shut off notifications or put things out of hand reach because I am just, it's that sort of human nature. And honestly, I've tried it a couple days and I think I've gained, if I had to guess, I think I've gained maybe, an hour of time that otherwise would have been wasted just with more focus. And so the power of that is huge. So I just encourage if you can even muster it up for, the strength up to do this for a couple of days, it might also help shed some light on where you're not using your time in the best way.
Our nonprofit is committed to having senior leadership serve on nonprofit boards as a way to further our partnerships, visibility, and engagement in the community. Since some corporations cover their employees' board dues, should nonprofits do this as well?
If it's part of your strategic plan to increase exposure or develop more partnerships or increase visibility, whatever that directive is, and one of the ways and strategies you're going to do that is having perhaps your mid-level, senior level staff serve on nonprofit boards, I think that there is room to have that discussion and perhaps have a policy for it. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I'm a stickler, though, and you know this, Andy. I believe that every individual who ever serves on a nonprofit board should make some personal contribution. Just they are walking the talk. They are a role model. I am not saying that they have to do it all. And in this circumstance, perhaps there's some sort of shared policy for a shared kind of fee arrangement or some sort of a small commitment, because that employee is still getting, even if it's in furtherance of your nonprofit's direction, that employee serving on that board is still getting some own personal benefit aside from your organization. So, and I also think it gets dicey. We see this thing happen where a corporation pays for an employee's dues. I'm going to not talk nonprofit for a minute, right? Pays for an employee's board dues. And then that employee is not nearly as committed to the organization. It's kind of like, oh yeah, my corporation does it. Like, I'm just here. And then if that employee leaves that corporation or God forbid gets fired, then there's this whole kind of cluster that happens within the organization about, oh God, within the nonprofit, oh, what do? Do we just find a replacement? Does the does that corporation that was paying for that board member, send us a new one? And it really is, it's an individual choice, an individual service, even if you do work for your organization. And so I think I'm kind of going roundabout. The bottom line is, I think it's fine. I think some kind of policy and making sure you don't, you set a precedent that's fair, make sure something that's fair and consistent, because once you set this precedent, you also don't want to start having these huge line items on your nonprofit budget that you're like, oh my gosh, like this is turned into a monster. And a lot of corporations do that too, right? They have limitations or policies or up to a certain amount. So I think there's ways to do that you can budget for it as a nonprofit, further your strategic direction, and ensure your employee has some skin in the game too. And I think that's ultimately where you want to get with something like this.
Interesting.
Ooh, you have a difference. Okay.
So after you've said that, I'm trying to sort of absorb it and make sure that I'm not like just like reacting. Because my first instinct was like in the question, you say you're committed to having senior leadership. So to me, the answer would have been, yeah. If you're committed to do it and this is something that your nonprofit is doing, then my sense is that you should be then responsible for any financial things. So I think from because you started leading into a different issue, which I agree with you on, which is where you've gone to the utility and you said, I would like to have a board member from your utility because I know that if I do that, then you're going to sponsor my gala event at the $25,000 level or whatever.
Yes.
And then the utility picks randomly or says, who wants to be on this? And somebody goes, I guess I will. And so you end up with Joe employee on your board who's at a senior level is, intellectually maybe feels like your mission is important, but isn't committed. And the reason they're not committed is not because they don't have, not because they don't have skin in the game, but they're not committed because they just aren't committed. They're like, I have to do this for my job. My job is making me do this. And I don't know that having them have to split the annual board giving fee, like a responsibility with the corporation would be the solution for that. I think the solution would be don't go to the utility to get crappy board members.
Right.
Because you're just going to get crappy board members and you shouldn't be surprised by that. So I feel like it's two separate questions. It is.
And I think I was mixing those. So yeah, I think there's a distinction. I agree. Like my short answer is yes. Like if your organization's committed to having senior leadership serve on nonprofit boards, then that should be a budget item. I do still believe strongly there should be policy around it because I think that could get totally extreme and out of control. Yeah. And there's a million what if factors to take into consideration with that. But there is also that sense of if you're the nonprofit looking for that corporate, that employee at a corporation, I do think you as a nonprofit need to ask yourself, like, again, is it just, if this is just for the money, like that is the wrong reason to have the board member, right? So again, going back to that board matrix and the criteria and what you're looking for. And if maybe it's a long-term volunteer from that company in your nonprofit, that makes sense because it's someone committed, passionate. And then I think that person also would be more willing to say, yeah, I'll step up and make a personal donation and my company will do this. Like that, in my opinion, would be golden. Yeah.
Instead, you get the junior vice president of whatever, right? And they're like, I just need this so that I can get to the next level at my corporate job.
Yeah.
I'm required to do this and I don't really care. So I guess this made me think about a second thing too. Like, are nonprofits really doing this? Is this a new thing that I'm not aware of where nonprofits are trying to get their employees to be on the boards of other nonprofits?
So I can tell you, I can only respond that there is one organization I am aware of in Southern Nevada that is absolutely doing that. And that is one of their strategies moving forward. And I think it's an interesting one. I think, one of the things I have actually cautioned or shared with this organization is that they also need to make sure, can their employee fulfill, what are the board requirements of this board they are going to join? Because what I find so much happens, you work at a nonprofit, you go sit on another nonprofit board, that nonprofit board asks you to fundraise, and you say, I feel uncomfortable. That's a conflict, right? My loyalty is to my day job. So I think there's got to be a whole lot of sort of really being clear, making like on all levels between both parties, because that's just sticky.
Yeah, it feels like it's a different question. It's the next question we're gonna get. Hey, I'm on the board of one thing. Like, so the times that I've seen it in the past have really been when it's something very program related. So if you have a nonprofit that's in a particular space, and let me think of a specific example that isn't a food bank for a change. So if you're in a performing arts center
Yeah.
board and you really want to be connected to the local theater community because that's important to your board, that you may bring on the ED of the local community theater. So you're trying to tap into what's going on in the community and not just be a behemoth.
Yeah.
So I've seen that happen, and that makes sense because then, there's sort of a kind of a hand in glove relationship between the two parties, and it's not something that's we're going for the same grant, and now I know your secret sauce, and which just feels like I would be really uncomfortable bringing on a nonprofit person onto another nonprofit's board just in general. That feels really strange to me. Plus, I know they don't have a lot of money. They work for a nonprofit.
Right.
I mean, their board relations, there just seems like it would just be a really interesting choice. I'd love to hear, if anybody's doing this, I'd love to hear more about this. If we can interview on your podcast about why you've decided to do this and how it's working out, I think that's really interesting. I'd love to hear more.
I mean, one thing I would love to add to that discussion is that I think it's really just, it's difficult when you work, like you're on the board and you work in a high level or executive director role with your nonprofit, because most likely, even though you may oversee programs or that, you still have this inside knowledge from this nonprofit board you're serving on that could potentially benefit your organization in some way. That is, it could even be beyond fundraising. And I think it can get really dicey. And what I found, Andy, is I see a lot of executive directors, more so than other kind of staff, executive directors of nonprofits that serve on other boards. And that is sticky too. And let me be real here. The board members in that room sitting with their fellow peer who works at ABC nonprofit, those board members are thinking, what are you taking back to your shop? I mean, there's these discussions and like internal kind of strife that comes up with it. So it's not like a deal breaker, but there's a lot of, I think, kind of hoops to think through or hoops to jump through and sort of things to think through.
Yeah.
Hey everybody, it's Stacy here, and I have a special guest today. This is a little bit out of the norm for us, and we love things that mix it up. So thank you, Kate McLaughlin, for being here with us. Kate is the executive director of Girls on the Run Las Vegas. So welcome, Kate.
Thank you for having me.
Kate is not here. While she does represent this fabulous organization, she's not here today wearing her Girls on the Run hat. She is actually here today wearing her Nonprofit Everything podcast listener hat. And with that said, just to give our listeners a little bit of background, our last episode that was released, we had a question from someone doing a virtual gala and talking about recorded music and what they needed to do as far as copyrights were concerned and what could be used or not used. And Andy did an amazing job at doing some research and sharing some background on it. Kate is nodding her head. Nobody can see that, but he did a great job. I, on the other hand, not so much. And really spoke a bit out of school and out of turn, which honestly speaking, I didn't realize until Kate was kind enough to reach out to me via email and share the perspective of perhaps a performing artist, a musician. So, Kate, are you willing to share a little bit with our listeners about what hot buttons I hit of yours?
Sure. So, to give you a little background, in my prior life, I was once upon a time worked in the music business. And one of the jobs that I had in that time was doing copyright clearances. So I got to know quite a few things about copyright. But what the hot button was that got me was that you guys were focused on the nonprofit and them raising money, and it's their gala, and we don't want to make them do any extra work. But the musician and the songwriter, they earned that money. They created that song that you want to play at your event. and they deserve to get paid for it. And that is why copyright exists, is so that an artist, whether that's a musician, an author, a filmmaker, whomever, actually can make a living off of their art. And so copyright is set up to go for the life of the artist and then some, so that it pays their bills and it allows them to keep making art. So anytime anyone says anything about, oh, let's figure out a way to avoid this, yeah, that's a hot button.
Well, and I'm sure you're not alone, Kate. I'm sure anyone listening who has any more knowledge and awareness and social graces than I do would have known better than to say what I did. To our listeners, my apologies. I literally used the words workaround. I think I used them multiple times. What is a workaround to this? And I will share in full disclosure, I was looking at it. I was very narrow-minded and thinking, how do we make the nonprofit's life easier? How do we save them money? But that doesn't make it right, because musicians, and there's amazing nonprofits that have performing artists working for them and have musicians, and there's amazing people who aren't in nonprofits that give us the amazing gift of music and song and art. And so I just really hung my head in embarrassment. So Kate, I can't thank you enough for schooling me a bit and for helping me see my ways. Definitely need to keep that in mind.
I just want to add two quick notes. One, there is a workaround, and I'm using air quotes here. I realize you can't see. And that is, if you hire local musicians and they only perform their own original works, and they do not have an agreement with any of the performing rights organizations, which are ASCAP, BMI, and CSAC, then you won't have to file for a license from ASCAP, BMI, and CSAC. I will say that's very hard to find, because anyone who has created an original work that they're going to perform in public has probably recorded it too, and thus they would have had made those agreements. So that's a really hard workaround to find. But the other thing to know is that I did a little research myself. With ASCAP, if you're applying for a license with them to put on a gala, that falls under the benefit clause. And if your gala has 1,000 people or less, you want to know what your license fee is? $10.
What? How much?
$10.
You're kidding me.
I'm not kidding you.
Oh, wow. Wow. Well, that's huge, Kate. Oh my gosh. I think you've just saved people a ton of money right there with that one finding.
Don't be intimidated by it. It's an easy process. And there's different categories. For example, for Girls on the Run, we have a different license to fill out for a race than for a gala. But they have it set up so that charities can use music at their events and not pay a fortune for the right to do so.
So I realize you're not, quote, an expert in this, although you certainly sound like one and seem like one to me. But I'm wondering, from a virtual side, when you really have no control over how many people perhaps are watching your virtual event, do you happen to know, do they deal with that at all?
You know, it didn't say on the form that I was looking at, but you could easily say, okay, well, based on how many people typically come to our live events and how many followers we have on YouTube or Facebook or whatever number, you can make an argument for that's how many people we expect to see this. Now, obviously, things can go viral, and if that were to happen, then there can be amends made after the fact. If you do your best job in the front end to pay what's legally fair, then legally afterwards, if they come back for additional compensation, they really can't penalize you for that.
You know, Kate, my guess is, big assumption here, but I'm guessing that a lot of our listeners are in the camp of paying people what's fair and equitable. It's a topic we as nonprofit professionals talk about all the time, and lots of literature in the industry about fair pay and paying people for what they've produced, what they've created, what their hard work entails. And this is no different. And that is the thing that I really took away. I think in some weird way, I was demonizing not the musicians themselves, but this licensing firm that was somehow not even getting the money to the musicians, but it doesn't sound like that's the case. The licensing firm just helps control all of this, right? And make sure people are paid for what they deserve.
Yes. The performing rights organizations keep track of who owns the rights to the underlying song as well as a sound recording and make sure that the appropriate folks get paid. That's what they do. And they're generally nonprofits as well.
Oh, wow. Well, kudos to them. Well, everybody, if this hasn't taught you something, I guess there's some lessons here to be learned just about life in general. We all have a lot to learn, and I am top of that list. And I am humbled by this conversation. I am grateful to Kate for speaking up and grateful to her being a regular listener. And this also is encouragement to all of you, because Andy and I are certainly not the experts. I think he's more of an expert than I am, but we'll just say we try to do our research. We try to speak intelligently, and sometimes we get it wrong, or we really miss a perspective that needs to be heard. So thank you, Kate, for coming to the table. And for all of our listeners, please, if you feel like Kate did about any of our topics, you reach out to us and hey, we'll highlight you and talk a little bit about what faux pas we made at that point, because I'm sure there will be plenty more in the future. Thank you, Kate.
Thank you.
And we have reached the end of another episode of Nonprofit Everything. Thanks for joining us. Stacy and I really appreciate that you take the time to listen to the podcast. We're always delighted when we check out how many listeners that we have and see that it's a large number. And that makes us so happy to see that that this is useful, because we figured if it wasn't useful, the number would get smaller and smaller and smaller, but it's not. It's actually getting bigger. And that makes us really happy. So it tells us we're doing good stuff. But if there's stuff we could do better, if there are questions you want answered, if you have comments on the format, comments on the music, comments on the audio editing, comments on anything at all, send that to us or send us your questions. And we are so excited to get those and really happy to see them and really geek out on doing all the research to try to figure out what the answers are. Or if we can't figure it out, finding a guest expert that can. So thanks again for joining us. We will see you in a couple of weeks.